now, you extremist, hateful fearmonger. It's this reversal that is so, that
it's insidious. It runs, it's so like interwoven into, the culture and, and society and everyone's thinking. It's really hard to, kind of take a backhoe, that stuff out of there.
Well, this is something that's very easy to do. So if you've got someone who's a statist, you ask them very pointed questions and try to get them away so that they cannot disassociate from the violence. Another way to do it too is especially if they're Republican. Oh God, especially if they're Republican. You just have to ask them, could you tell me what the Republican, thought process is in 2 or 3 sentences? What is it you believe? Because if I ask you, Kurt, if I ask Larken, what is it as an anarchist? What is your core belief that makes you an anarchist? And you would tell me in 1 sentence.
Nonviolence, for one, unless someone's actually, I don't want to say violence, but nonviolence against anyone, and, except for maybe in defense of your own personal property.
And Larken, what would you say?
That every individual owns himself and that nobody has the right to initiate violence against another.
See how simple that is?
Yeah.
Ask the same question of a Republican or a Democrat or so-called anyone who votes.
Wait, I have the Republican answer. It's let's go to socialism about half as fast as the Democrats want to.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the things that, because there's so much going on about socialism. That's the Republican talking point now. Oh, it's social. So you're opposed to government takeover of the healthcare industry because it's socialism. That's right. And it's when they stop. Okay, so you're opposed to all public education, including the college system. We got it. Let's be consistent now. Let's just be consistent. See, as anarchists, we want it all abolished. It's easy. It's violent. It's such an easy, radical, hate-filled thing to understand that initiating violence is wrong. But with the Republicans, it's very easy to say. And that's just one of them. And most Republicans that I know are really big sports fanatics. And you have to point out, that stadium that the Cardinals play in? Socialism.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, socialism. Oh, you watch college ball. Socialism.
Right.
Socialism.
Yep.
Okay, well, you have BYU, which does not accept government funds, as far as I know, but they're few and far between.
They built the stadium on all those syntaxes, right? And then they charge you, I don't know how much for a ticket, and they make you pay for parking, and then at the end of the game, and when you go, we won, right? It's like, well, what did you win, right? Didn't you write something like that, Mark, somewhere?
Yeah, that was in my video, The Delusions, which is on my website. I did that at the Liberty Forum last year in New Hampshire. Yeah. They're laughing at you. They're laughing at you. And, so here, if you're talking to a Republican, it's very easy to show who the radical really is. And look at all the time, money, and energy that you're spending opposing one additional aspect of socialism. When you support, and this is the big one. If you really want to give a Republican fits, point out to say, what is socialism? Okay, that's when you take someone's money and give it to somebody else. What about the United States military? Isn't that an example of socialism?
Absolutely.
Right.
Right.
Their excuse, they don't at all think from principle, because their excuse is, we really need a defense, because otherwise we'd be invaded. So it's really, really important, so it's okay that we rob you.
Well, I would say that people need defense, not necessarily nations, and we all know that nations don't really exist.
But Kurt, we got to pause just for a moment. My name is Marc Stevens. Kurt Tischer and I joined today on the No State Project by Larken Rose. We're going to talk about, finish with Kurt's thought in just a moment here on the No State Project. We'll be right back here on American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com. back to the No State Project. My name is Marc Stevens. Of course, the website is markstevens.net. And if you like the website and you need a great webmaster, contact my guest host today, Kurt Tischer, who makes it so much easier by helping to maintain the website. It's Kurt Tischer at kurttischer.net. And our guest today on the No State Project, of course, is Larken Rose. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
And what we were talking about before we went to the break, we were talking about the fence and how if you really want to give a Republican fits, if they're totally opposed to and I'm not for the health care, none of us here are. We're for the abolition of government, of course. But the Republicans seem to be on this tirade about stopping the march to socialism, and they don't understand the march to socialism started in 1789.
It's a long march.
That's a bit, yeah. And that you point out that the United States military is socialized defense.
Right.
They will lose their mind. So I want to continue on that.
Yeah, I mean, what I was saying was that I would say that people need defense and not necessarily nations or states or anything like that because, well, at least if you're in the Marc Stevens camp, states and nations don't exist, right? But, I said to somebody the other day in a comment thread, I think it was on Strike the Root, that the concept of national defense makes as much sense as the concept of national health care.
Yep. Yeah, the thing I was saying before is when Republicans say, we have to have a national defense because it's necessary, we'll get invaded and blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, food is pretty darn necessary. In fact, I might not need to be defended from an attacker for a few weeks, but I'm going to need some food in there. So by your rationale, doesn't that make it okay for government to rob everyone for food? The Republican justification for what they want state violence for would apply just as well or better to lots of other things, food production and housing and this, that, and the other thing. There's no principle there. They want to decide, well, it's okay for us to rob you for this thing, but if Obama wants to rob you for a different thing, that's horrible and it's socialism and it's tyranny and it's just, arguing over about where our stolen money goes just isn't really that important once you miss the principle that you shouldn't be robbing us to begin with, even if it's for our own good, quote unquote.
Well, they're always saying it's for your own good, and they can't argue from principle. When you see some of these talking heads and some of these guys on these huge syndicated radio shows, they talk a lot about, we argue from first principles. Have you ever heard that?
I don't think they can name a first principle.
Yeah, I mean, this is why even with a professional publicist, I could not get on those shows. Because they do not want anyone getting on the air, because they pre-screen, no one who is going to actually question them on their first principles. Because you could ask them, sir, do you advocate the initiation of the use of violence? You do not. Great. So you're an anarchist. Oh, we want to. And then it's all we've got to, and that's where you get to this ridiculous thing called government being a necessary evil. They try to, and I think they use that, guys, because they're trying to ease their conscience a bit by saying it's necessary. So you're admitting it's evil. Well, what's evil about it?
Right.
They don't want to say. Yeah, and if you ask them, what is the criteria that you, principled conservative Republican, would use to decide when to steal my money for something you want? Like, what exactly is it anything you declare is necessary for me, or is there some other magical way that you can tell when it's okay to rob me and when it isn't?
Yeah, what's the principle that makes it okay? What first principle that these people talk about, what is it?
Right.
It doesn't exist.
It's just not, so what they talk about, and one of them...
Well, they'll always fall back to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all of that stuff, usually.
Yeah.
Which isn't a principle, it's just a list somebody else made up.
Right.
Well, I love how they say that there are principles of freedom and whatnot embodied in the Constitution. Now, I've got to tell you something. I am not aware of any freedom of principle or liberty that is in the Constitution. It says to secure the blessings of liberty, but that's not a principle of liberty. That's just a nice statement of what it's intended to do.